Welcome to another episode of the Financial Armor Show. My name is Brad Cooper, the CEO of Cooper Financial Investments and the host of your show. And as always, I want to welcome my amazing co-host, Tony Shore. How you doing today, Tony?
I am so good, Brad. I'm incredible today. And you know why, because this show,
Yes.
probably the most exciting show we've had to date. And we've had some good ones lately.
Yes, we have.
But we'll get into that in a minute. I'm just excited. The holiday season, I absolutely love it. I love spending time with family. And I hope everybody out there is going to have a good, happy, and safe holiday season. But Brad, I've been busy. I know you've been busy. You guys are trying to ready your new office building to move
Yes.
into, and you've got that plus the holidays going on, don't you?
Yes. This is my most favorite time of the year, but we've been taking on a large renovation of a brand new office we're moving into here in the next week that was supposed to be done by November 1st, but didn't happen. Surprise, surprise. But, we're so thankful, so blessed, and looking for some time off. And Tony, like you said, I'm excited too as we approach the end of the year. The guest we have on our show today is, the highlight of my year, and looking forward to this podcast.
Well, Brad, you've been knocking it out of the park with guests, and I chalk it up just you're a likable guy and one of the top advisors in the U.S. So it's great that you've gotten these great guests. But today we're on a whole other level with
Yes.
our guests. Let our listeners know. I mean, this is a huge get for the show.
Absolutely. And I don't want to slop this up. So I'm going to read the credentials of this superstar and then introduce her. And we're going to get into the topic of taxes, politics, all these fun topics that no one wants to talk about. Or if they do, they want to argue about them. But we're going to lay out the foundation and what to expect over the next several years on how you can prepare your retirement. But our special guest today is Becky Swansburg. She's the CEO of Stonewood Financial and the nation's leading expert on legislative risk in retirement. She's a nationally recognized speaker and author. Becky has trained advisors, including myself, all over the country, incorporating tax strategies, retirement strategies as well. She's a co-author also, and of industry-leading books, The No Compromise Retirement Plan, The New Rules of Retirement Saving, and the new Holistic Retirement book, which we've given away probably a couple hundred this past year. Prior to joining Stonewood, just a little bit of Becky's past, she was the Director of Public Affairs for the Greater Louisville, Inc. Also, she oversaw government relations and strategic communications. Becky also handled communications for several U.S. congressmen and government agencies and worked in the White House press office in Washington, D.C., which very impressive. Becky holds a political science degree from Middlebury College and an MS in public relations from Boston University. She's very active in her community and just so knowledgeable on this topic. Not only does she have the ties in with Washington still and keeps communication there, but also giving us wonderful training advice so we can pass down to our clients to further impact their retirement. So with all that said, welcome, Becky. Again, thank you for being our guest today.
Oh my gosh, thanks for having me. Let me talk a little about one of my
Yes.
favorite topics, taxes and retirement.
That's right. And I know there's been so much to talk about since the election. Thank God. I think we'd all agree the election's over. The most enjoyable part I have is when I pull up to a stoplight here in sunny Arizona, there's not 5,000 signs next to the stoplights. It's all clean now, beautiful grass and flowers.
That's right. Y'all were in the mix of it. I mean, really in the center.
But we're a few weeks from the inauguration. So share with us what you're hearing and what we can expect with the new administration when it comes to their policies and that will impact savers today.
Yeah, in January, we are inaugurating a new president. President-elect Trump will finish out the second 4 years of an 8-year term, even though they were non-contiguous. But we are also inaugurating new congressional leadership. And the Republicans will have a very tight, narrow control of both the House and Senate. So all eyes are not only on what topics we might see coming out of Washington that, of course, impact U.S. savers, but also what can our government actually get through? What can pass as legislation with these narrow majorities? So I would say the number one thing right off the bat that I know savers are probably all keeping their eyes on is what is going to happen with the Trump tax cuts.
Right.
You know, we passed these in 2017. They reduced federal individual income tax bracket rates for probably every single person listening today and all of us on this call. But those tax bracket reductions were not permanent, and they are actually set to expire in 2025. So with President Trump returning to the White House and Republicans controlling the House and Senate, big question, can we get an extension of these tax cuts through Congress so that those tax bracket rates stay at these artificially low levels for a little bit longer?
So with that said, Becky, what are you hearing and what's your feelings? I know you don't have a crystal ball and you don't have inside direct impact. I don't think you do to President Trump and Congress.
No.
Pretty close, but
Yeah.
how are you feeling from what you're hearing and from your past experience of what you expect and hope to happen?
Well, I wish I could divine the future. You know, I'm here in Louisville, Kentucky, home of Churchill
Yes.
Downs and the Kentucky Derby. I guess I'd be
Yes.
betting the ponies if I could divine the future. But
Yes.
I will tell you what history tells us. There was only a narrow path through this election where we could have gotten an extension of these Trump tax cuts, but we managed to walk that path. We will, you know, President Trump has said this is a priority of his to make sure that these tax cuts are either extended or made permanent. I suspect that to make these tax cuts permanent probably isn't on the table. We don't have the majorities for that. And they're also expensive. I'm not saying that they're not beneficial, but, you know, they do have a deficit impact year after year just because we're cutting taxes. We're cutting the revenue that the government gets and giving more revenue to all of us to go spend in our daily lives. So if they want to get an extension through, they're going to have to prioritize it at the beginning of the administration, which means by the time January 20th comes and we've inaugurated the president, we should see that agenda start to Q1, Q2 really form up and start getting pushed through the House and Senate if we want to see some action. They probably could take action in 2026 and apply it retroactively to the 2025 tax year, but it gets messy. And look, you've just won. You have a mandate. You got to push it through. I suspect that we will only see an extension of these lower tax bracket rates. And I think that that point is really important for savers because of this. You know, sometimes I've talked to a lot of people that kind of feel like this a little bit of sigh of relief. You know, we had an administration previously that really kind of had an eye on retirement savings, particularly 401ks and IRAs. And we're looking to raise taxes on a lot of savers probably listening today. We've gotten a bit of a reprieve from that, but I will remind you, President Trump, this is only a 4-year presidency.
Right.
He does not have the ability to run again, which means that the only thing we know for sure is that we have a 4-year window to potentially get some of this tax legislation through. Now, I bet if we polled all of everyone listening today, none of them would say, oh, you know what, man, actually, I just want to be retired for the next 4 years. And after that, I don't care. No, like we all want to be retired 10, 20, 30, 40 years in the future. And that means that we can't just look at what's going to happen for these next 4 years, but what kind of impact is that going to have long-term on the future? So I think the best hope for us as savers is we do get an extension of these Trump tax cuts. We have these lower rates. Rates right now for middle-class Americans, tax bracket rates, are about 30% lower than they were in the early 2000s and late 90s. So taxes are kind of at a discount today. If we can get an extension from that, that gives savers a little more time to do some proactive tax planning, make sure that their retirement assets are tax diversified and have kind of the tax status that they want. But that's a narrow window. It's not going to stick around forever. Very slim chance we see these lower rates, 10 years from now.
And just to remind our listeners why this is so important. You're right, Becky. We're at really the lowest point ever in our lifetime that federal income taxes have been. There's a chart, which I wish I had in front of me right now, that goes back the last 100 years, where federal income taxes were. I mean, for many years, 91% was the upper tax bracket. Then it dropped to 70 for many years, then 50. So I think we all agree with everything going on in our country with the national deficit and many other areas. Taxes are going to have to go up in the future. But I remember a couple weeks ago, we were interviewing Ed Slott. He mentioned a report that estimated, and maybe you have different numbers, Becky, over $40 trillion of pre-taxed account, IRAs, 401ks, 403bs, that you're going to be forced as a saver, as a retiree at 73 years of age to start pulling out required minimum distributions. And when that happens and taxes increase, you're looking at the perfect storm that could impact you if you don't prepare.
Yeah, it's funny. I talk a lot about taxes in retirement. And the reason I think it is such a critical topic for savers to understand is that the vast majority, as Ed mentioned, of every US savings dollar is in these 401ks and IRAs and 403bs and TSPs like I had when I was in government.
Yes.
And what we don't realize is that when we save in these tax deferred vehicles, we're making a bet that our taxes in the future will be lower than they are today. But just like we shouldn't go into retirement betting that the market will just go up, up, up forever and we never have to worry, we can't just take this bet that taxes somehow in the future will be magically lower than they are today. And that means that most savers could have a pretty big retirement tax bill coming due in the future. So any tax changes between today and the day you take that last dollar from your IRA or your 401k, and by the way, it could be your heirs taking that last dollar, not just you. Any changes in taxes could end up with more going to the IRS and less going into your pocket to save. So I truly believe taxes are probably the largest, least understood retirement risk that face most savers today.
And then let's face it, I think the majority of Americans and experts in these fields like yourself, Becky, believe that taxes will have to go up at some point. I mean, you can't keep kicking that can down the road forever with trillions and trillions of dollars of U.S. debt that is rising exponentially. I think everybody agrees, right, Brad, that eventually taxes will probably go up. But like you say, nobody has a crystal ball, and they have come down versus what when they were 90%. That was eons ago, and there were many reasons behind that. But we're in a different situation now, and I think eventually the government has to raise taxes somehow.
Yeah, I'll give you some numbers to kind of prove that
Yes.
point. I have often said, we were just talking actually before we started recording, that we are not one election away from solving America's problems. Right. And the risk of rising taxes in America is much deeper than any one president can control. And I'll tell you why. So every year, the Congressional Budget Office puts out a report of every dollar that the government took in as revenue, primarily through individual income taxes, and every dollar of revenue that the government spent through expenditures. Well, if we look at the most recent fiscal year, the last fiscal year, the government took in $4.4 trillion of revenue. And that's a lot of money, unless, of course, you spend more than $4.4 trillion. And what shocked
That's real
me
money even to you, Brad.
Well,
that's right.
Small amount, but
So what shocked me so much when I looked at this most recent CBO report is that we took in $4.4 trillion. And then when you look at the expenditure side, on mandatory spending alone, mandatory spending is spending that the president and Congress does not control. These are things like Social Security, Medicare, service on our national debt. Before Congress even met, before the president passed a single priority, we had spent $4.4 trillion as a nation, which means every single dollar that comes in to our treasury is spent before Congress and the president even pass a single bill. So in that sense, all congressional spending is deficit spending. And that's what's driven our federal debt to these record high levels. The problem is with the demographic realities of America, spending on things like Social Security and Medicare are just going to be driven higher. So it's easy to look to Congress and say, rein in spending, spend less, spend less. But the fact of the matter is, what's really driving the need for higher taxes in our nation is just our demographics. It's a math problem, not a political problem.
So true. What I've found, Becky, and I'm sure you have too, especially as you're educating advisors throughout the country. I've had the privilege of speaking throughout the country to not only advisors, but more so consumers, savers. And what's sad is this message is not going out like it should. Most people in our industry, I started out on the broker side, selling stocks, bonds, mutual funds. But halfway through my career, I changed to holistic financial planning and more educating, dealing with all the risk that are out there. Taxes being, I agree, at the very top. There, of course, there's market risk, which that's where 99% of our industry focuses on, but they neglect to talk about taxes, long-term care issues, and other risks that's out there. So as I'm speaking to people, I'm realizing too, when I mentioned the Secure Act, and when it comes to beneficiaries inheriting IRA money, 401k money, now they're forced, aren't they, Becky, to liquidate that account within 10 years, whether they want to or not. Well, I guess they do have a choice. They'll be hit with a 50% penalty if they don't.
Right.
But what's that going to do to their taxes? So, that's an area which I think, every person needs to wake up and realize, there's going to be a problem down the road. And whether it's with beneficiaries or one thing that I learned from Ed Slott many years ago, he talks about the widow or widower tax trap. Another fact is when a spouse passes away and the other spouse takes on that IRA money, they're now forced into a different tax bracket, a single filing tax bracket, not joint, which is almost double for some of our clients.
Right. You bring up a great point, which is, when we think about taxes in retirement, we tend to think of what I call tax risk, which is the risk that your tax bracket or your tax burden could be higher in retirement than you planned. But there's also this whole world of legislative risk that is impacting today's savers. And legislative risk is the exact kind of things you're talking about. It's not just your tax bracket that matters. It's a question of what is taxed, when it is taxed, how it is taxed, and who it's taxed for. And those Secure Act changes where they eliminated for most inheritors of an IRA the ability to stretch out that IRA didn't change those savers' tax bracket, but it changed their ability to mitigate their tax bill in any given year. And so there's kind of all of these different government initiatives. And this is where I think Congress will focus a lot of its attention in the future. If we know we need more tax revenue, brackets can only get us so far. We've heard this kind of mantra the past maybe 4 to 8 years of, don't worry, people making less than $400,000 a year won't see their taxes raised. We're just raising taxes on the ultra wealthy. But here's the truth. People that make less, or I guess people that make $100,000 a year and more, six-figure earners in America, they pay almost 90% of taxes. Wow. So if we want to drive income tax revenue, it can't just be on the ultra wealthy. People making $400,000 a year and more, they only pay about 35% of the taxes. Wow. Tax reform has to be more broad-based. There was a great Cato Institute, or was it Cato or Brookings? One of the think tanks came out with a study where they looked if we had a new 100% tax bracket, every dollar over $500,000 in this country would be taxed at 100%. And it still couldn't close the annual deficit. We'd still be left with about $500,000 a year deficit in the budget. So tax reform has got to be broad-based. They've got to look not just at tax bracket, but at these other kind of fees and government revenue that we can generate by being creative with the tax code.
Wow. So do you see that happening in the future? I mean, as we look out, I am optimistic and positive for the next several years, but beyond that, there's going to have to be major changes. If you Google Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, all of those are going to be bankrupt by the year 2033 unless Congress steps in, which they will. And really, there's two primary ways of solving the tax issue, which you talked about: spend less or raise taxes. And we know that is coming, in the future. So,
did you say cut spending? Because
yeah,
my side hurts from the
yes.
laughter when you talk about government cutting spending.
You know, that should let us all know that the reason why our country has such a spending problem and debt issue, look at the leadership. And that's sad. You know, one topic, I was just talking to your partner, Becky, here a few weeks ago at a event we were at, and we talked about Medicare. And here's a topic that a lot of people don't know about,
Yeah.
IRMAA.
I knew just where you were going.
And not only is federal income taxes an issue, but also IRMAA with Part B, it's based on income. So if you could touch on that, because this is a surprise that a lot of people are receiving and not being told by their advisors nor their CPAs.
Yeah, so when we talk about these kind of stealth taxes, what are ways outside of tax brackets that Congress can generate additional revenue for our government? A great one is IRMAA. IRMAA is a surcharge that some savers pay for their different parts of Medicare. But the thing is, the government just gets to set that fee in those brackets every year. And it can be several $thousands a year for a saver, and double that if you're a couple. So
Right.
one of the interesting things with IRMAA is it's this, I like to say, if it looks like a duck and it walks like a duck, the government doesn't call it a tax. They call it a surcharge or a fee, but it's real money that you have to give to the government every year, or they can withhold it from your Social Security check. That can take a big dent out of kind of the income you were planning to spend. And it is totally just controlled on the whims of the government. I actually downloaded the other day all the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services reports to try to find the formula or the exact way that every year they set these rates. Fed it into ChatGPT. ChatGPT couldn't figure it out. I couldn't figure it out. Somewhere in the bowels of the government, they are determining every year, how they're going to COLA adjust this, how they're going to set the brackets. But it is a big impact. And you're absolutely right, Brad. It's one of those things that I'm surprised that a lot of savers are not getting good advice about from their advisor, especially if they're considering a Roth conversion. Now, I love Roth conversions. I'm a big believer in tax-free assets in retirement. I always like to say you wouldn't probably put all your retirement in Apple stock and hope for the best. I don't know why we don't want some diversification in our taxes as well. But the other side of that is, as we're converting those funds into a Roth account, we have to do it in the right way. We want to do it in a way that not only minimizes taxes, but also minimizes those IRMAA surcharges and fees. So it's one of those things that it sounds simple to come on here and say, oh, just do a Roth, get some tax-free assets. But if you don't do it the right way, you could end up paying more than you need to. And I think I can speak for everyone listening today that no one wants to give the government more than is required.
Right.
I feel
We all
confident
want to minimize that. But nobody likes Uncle Sam and Aunt Irma, I call
That's
them.
correct.
Those are the two. I don't even think they're my real aunt and uncle, to be honest. And they just want your money. Yeah.
So
they
really,
probably know more about you than your real aunt and uncle, though. They know everything.
That's true.
Wow, that's crazy. One of the wonderful reports that have made an impact, Becky, on our clients the last several years is a tax analysis report that came from Stonewood that you and your partners created. And I know come 2025, it's even more of an advanced tax analysis report that's going to show you really the difference of, yes, here's your IRA, 401k, pre-tax money. If you don't do any tax planning, if you don't do any conversions, here's your possible tax consequence versus, like you said, Becky, strategically over the next maybe 4, 5, 6 years, start shifting money from taxable to tax-free. Here's what your savings can be. And that's one of the reports that we give to everyone that comes through our office. And also come 2025, that's any listener who calls in will get a free copy of that report that right there alone could change your retirement and also your beneficiaries' retirement years.
I'll tell you, I am a data nerd myself. And I say, my team knows, I say all the time, you cannot make informed decisions without information.
So
And
true.
it's one of the best things that savers can do as we're finishing out 2024, leading into 2025. What is the information that you need to make these informed decisions in retirement? And it's easy to calculate kind of the benefit of cost deferral, right? We knew by saving money in an IRA or 401k, and look, I did this too. I knew I got my write off every year, right? That was a good thing. But no one has ever really, until these reports and advisors like you analyzing this for their clients, what's the cost of tax deferral? What kind of retirement tax bill have we built up in our 401ks and IRAs? And are we happy with that retirement tax bill, or do we want to make some adjustments? That is the critical question to ask as we finish up 2024 and head into the new year. Because if you look at your retirement tax bill and you are not happy with that number and you want to make some adjustments, we can do so today at a discount because of those Trump tax cuts. But maybe we only have them for one more year. Maybe we'll squeak out 4 or 5 more years. But higher tax rates are coming. So the time for those conversion analyses and those conversion discussions are right now.
That's why it's so exciting, Becky, to talk about this topic, even though when you think of taxes, you think of blah, 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 boring, boring. But, this is something that you want to pay attention to. And I'm very thankful for you and your leadership with Stonewood and the resources that we give free to our clients and people that come into our office, and the lives we're changing. I just did some calculations a few months ago, and out of all of our clients, Becky, Tony, I think I've shared this with you before, approximately 66% of our clients most likely will be in a 0% tax bracket by the year 2030, meaning that their money is going to be converted to tax-free accounts. Therefore, their Social Security is not going to be taxed at a high rate, which most retirees experience here in the United States. So that's important, but also the importance of leaving a legacy that's going to be tax-free as well, which I think is even more important.
I agree. I mean, look, in a way, we forget this, but if you have gotten years of tax benefit by saving in an IRA, and then you leave that to your kids, and now they can't even stretch it, you've left them with the tax bill.
You're right.
You said to them, the IRS bill is yours, but the IRS benefit was mine. So I am right aligned. I think IRAs are one of the cruddiest ways to leave a legacy, and there's so many better options to leverage because, most of the savers I know, they want a good life. And I tell my parents all the time, look, you all have worked incredibly hard. I want you to have the happiest retirement you can have. And then they say to me, Becky, we love you, but mostly we love your children because grandchildren are the thing that really matter to us.
True.
We want to make sure they have a great life too.
Yes.
So I think it's, this is such not just a discussion about how we manage our funds in retirement, but for the next generation, how can we leave them more and the IRS less? Look, your heirs know better what to do with your money than Uncle Sam. And we don't want to give the government more than its share. Even at the holidays, no one is gifting the government extra tax money.
You know what? I agree. So, wow, Tony, it's been a quick show today, and the topics I just want to share with you because I know many listening may have questions. You can call our office directly at 888-390-5277. Again, that's toll-free 888-390-5277 with any questions you have, or if you just want to sit down over a cup of coffee and learn from us and get your personal questions answered, we love that. Or you can visit our website, financialarmorshow.com. Again, that's financialarmorshow.com, and type in those questions and we'll get back those answers for you.
All right. And Brad, I know that you can also give away some more copies of Becky's book, right?
Yes, I tell you what, we ordered a big supply within the past year. We've given away hundreds, I know for a fact. And as we're moving into our new office, I noticed we still have a lot of fresh copies left. So as a giveaway, if you come into our office, we'll give you a copy of the Holistic Approach book that Becky has led and is the author of, but also we'll run a tax analysis report for you to see the impact that will have on your personal finances.
Yep. And before we go, Becky, remind our listeners your title, the name
Yes.
of your organization, your title, and just really quick, what it is you do there.
Yeah, well, so I'm CEO here at Stonewood Financial,
Yes.
and our passion is really uncovering this tax and legislative risk for American savers so that great advisors like Brad and your whole team can help them address it so that they have happier, more secure retirements. Just like I would never want you to blindly be investing in the market or blindly be looking at kind of lifespan issues on taxes, we have to be informed. And I would love to just leave my favorite quote is a quote by Judge Learned Hand, who was a U.S. Court of Appeals judge. And he was quoted all the time by the Supreme Court. I'm sure he was smart, but I also just think he was witty. And he said this quote that I love, and I think it's what all of us should take from this. He said, there are two systems of taxation in this country, one for the informed and one for the uninformed. So my passion has always been helping people save for retirement under the system of taxation for the informed.
That's great.
Wow.
Well, Becky, on that note, a great note to end the show on. Brad and Becky, thank you for being here. Listeners and viewers, that does it for today's episode of the Financial Armor Show with our host, Brad Cooper, and our special guest today was Becky Swansburg. Thanks.
Thanks for having me.